Lewis Carter did not fight wars. He scheduled them. In the grand chaotic theater of the Galactic Alliance, where plasma fire scorched the atmosphere of a dozen border worlds and species clashed over ideology and resources, Lewis was the man who ensured that the plasma rifles had batteries and the soldiers had freeze-dried synthetic beef stroganoff. He sat at the center of the Helios hub, a space station the size of a small moon, suspended in the geostationary orbit of a gas giant that shimmered like a bruised plum. His battlefield was a holographic interface that spanned 3 meters across a waterfall of cascading data streams, inventory manifests, and shipping routes. While the Vraxian hulking entities of Livingstone and internal combustion waged their crusade against the biological races, and while the Draven deployed their hive mind engineering to build fortress worlds, humanity had found its niche. Humans were not the strongest. They were not the fastest. They certainly were not the most durable. But humans were excellent administrators. Efficiency is down by 0.4% in Sector 7, Lewis muttered to himself, his fingers dancing across the haptic keyboard. The sensation was soothing, a rhythmic tapping that drowned out the low hum of the station's air scrubbers. If the Draven don't get their shipment of hyperalloy bolts within 12 hours, the defensive line on Kalor Prime collapses. If that collapses, the price of Tabana gas goes up. If gas goes up, my coffee budget goes down. He tapped a command rerouting a freighter from the commercial lane to a military corridor. The efficiency graph on his screen climbed back into the green. Lewis exhaled a sound of pure satisfaction. He was 32 years old, with hair the color of dusty cardboard, and the posture of a man who had spent the last decade hunched over a glowing terminal. He was a grand master of spreadsheets, a virtuoso of logistics. Carter. The voice boomed from the doorway, shattering his concentration. Lewis spun his chair around. Standing there was Supervisor Holloway, a man whose face was perpetually red, as if his blood pressure was in a constant race against his lifespan. "Supervisor," Lewis said, adjusting his glasses. "I was just optimizing the—" "Forget the bolts, Carter," Holloway barked, marching into the room. He smelled of stale ozone and cheap nutrient paste. "We have a glitch, a big one. The auto-deployment algorithm for the Ashfall 9 theater is frozen. It is flagging every single transfer request as invalid." Lewis frowned. "Ashfall 9. That is the meat grinder. Why are we sending manual updates there? The AI handles the cannon fodder." "The AI is stuck," Holloway snapped, throwing a datapad onto Lewis's pristine desk. "It is rejecting the credentials of the new reinforcement battalion. I need you to go into the source code, bypass the verification protocol, and force the deployment order through. Now." Lewis sighed, standing up and smoothing out his pristine gray uniform. It was a crisp, tailored suit that had never seen a speck of dirt, let alone mud or blood. "Fine. But you owe me an extra hour of break time." He followed Holloway to the main operations center. It was a cavernous room filled with hundreds of other humans, all typing furiously, their faces illuminated by the blue glow of war. But they were disconnected from the horror of it. To them, a casualty report of 5,000 dead was just a notification to order 5,000 more body bags. It was just data. They reached the central terminal. The screen was flashing a menacing crimson. "Error deployment protocol suspended." "Move," Holloway said, gesturing to the console. Lewis cracked his knuckles. This was his element. He accessed the back end of the system, his eyes scanning lines of code faster than most people could read a dinner menu. "I see it," he said after 2 minutes. "It is a logic loop. The system thinks the drop zones are active volcanoes because the thermal sensors are misreading the Vraxian heat signatures. It is trying to protect the troops by not letting them land." "Can you override it?" "I can override anything, sir." Lewis pulled up the manual deployment interface. It was a terrifyingly simple screen, a list of names on the left, a map of Ashfall 9 on the right, and a large pulsating button at the bottom that read, Execute deployment. I am going to patch the thermal sensor logic, Lewis narrated, his hands flying. Then I will select the batch file for the reinforcement platoon Alpha 69 and manually push them through. He highlighted the file. He moved his cursor toward the execute button. Then the station shook. It was a minor tremor, likely a docking clamp malfunctioning on a heavy cruiser 3 sectors away, but it was enough. Lewis's chair, which had a slightly wobbly caster wheel he had been meaning to fix for 6 months, jerked to the right. His hand slipped. The cursor slid off the batch file labeled Reinforcements Alpha and landed on the user profile currently logged into the terminal. User: Carter Lewis, Logistics Officer L4. At the exact same moment, his other finger, reflexively tensing from the shake, hit the enter key. The sound that followed was not the soft beep of a successful code patch. It was a heavy, industrial thud, like a prison door slamming shut. Status deployment confirmed. Target Ashfall 9. Unit Carter Lewis. Departure immediate. The silence in the operations center was absolute. Holloway stared at the screen. Lewis stared at the screen. Lewis's voice was a squeak. Did I just deploy myself? Cancel it, Holloway screamed, slamming his hand on the escape key. Cancel it. Access denied. War Act Protocol. 77B in effect. Deployment orders to active combat zones cannot be rescinded once confirmed. It is locked, Lewis whispered, the blood draining from his face until he looked like a sheet of paper. The War Act. To prevent cowardice. Once a name is in the tube, it goes. Do not be ridiculous, Holloway sputtered. You are an accountant. You are not a soldier. We will just call the hangar bay and tell them to... 2 security drones floated down from the ceiling, their scanners bathing Lewis in red light. Attention, Citizen Carter, the drones intoned in a cheerful synthetic voice. Congratulations on volunteering for the glorious defense of the Ember Gate. Please proceed to Hangar Bay 4 immediately. Failure to comply will be treated as desertion. Penalty summary execution. Lewis looked at Holloway. Holloway looked at the drones, then back at Lewis. Well, Holloway said, taking a step back, it seems the system is quite rigid. I am going to die, Lewis stated flatly. I have a pollen allergy. I get carsick in turbo lifts. I have never held a gun that wasn't a barcode scanner. I am going to die. Look at the bright side, Holloway said, his voice weak. You will get hazard pay. That is an extra 15 credits an hour. The transition from the sterile, climate-controlled perfection of Helios Hub to the interior of the dropship Iron Belly was a violation of all 5 senses. The air smelled of recycled sweat, hydraulic fluid, and fear. The lighting was a harsh, flickering amber. The noise was deafening, the roar of engines warming up, the clank of magnetic boots, the shouting of loadmasters. Lewis sat strapped into a crash seat that felt like it had been designed to torture the human spine. He was wearing a set of standard-issue infantry armor that was 3 sizes too big. The chest plate dug into his chin every time he breathed, and the greaves knocked together like hollow coconuts. Hey, fresh meat, a voice cut through the din. Lewis looked up. Sitting opposite him was a woman with scars mapping out a history of violence across her face. She was checking the charge on a medical laser scalpel with the casual demeanor of someone filing their nails. This was Dr. Maya Vance. You look like you are about to vomit inside that helmet, Maya observed. Pro tip, do not. The air filters recycle it back into your face. I am not supposed to be here, Lewis said, his voice trembling inside the helmet. I am a logistics officer. I press buttons. I optimize grain shipments. There has been a clerical error. There are no errors in war, only happy little accidents, said a creature sitting next to Maya. It was a Draven, an insectoid alien, roughly the size of a grizzly bear with 4 arms and a carapace that shimmered like oil on water. This was Tarek. He was tinkering with a heavy plasma repeater, tightening bolts with a speed that blurred the eye. A logistics officer, Tarek clicked his mandibles. Fascinating. Can you tell me why my requisition form for a new hydrospanner has been pending for 6 months? Probably because you filled out Form 12B instead of 12C, Lewis replied automatically. 12B is for civilian hardware. Military grade requires a supervisor's signature. Tarek stopped working. He looked at Maya. By the Great Hive, he is the real deal. We have a spreadsheet warrior. Stow it, a gravelly voice barked from the cockpit entrance. Captain Rowan, a human whose skin looked like cured leather, stormed down the aisle. He stopped in front of Lewis, looking him up and down with profound disappointment. So, you are the reinforcement command sent down one man and an admin clerk at that. It was a wrong button press, Lewis pleaded. Sir, you have to turn this ship around. We are already in the launch tube, son, Rowan spat. And we are dropping into Ashfall 9. The Vraxian have locked down the airspace around the Ember Gate. We are the only bird crazy enough to try and punch through to the Ember Ridge forward base. You are cargo now, Carter. Just try not to die before we land. It makes the paperwork messy. Paperwork, Lewis whimpered. I love paperwork. The ship lurched violently. Drop in 10 seconds, the pilot screamed over the intercom. Hold on to your butts, Tarek cheered, slamming his safety bar down. The floor dropped out from under them. The descent was not a graceful glide. It was a violent plummet. The iron belly screamed as it hit the atmosphere of Ashfall 9. Gravity became a malicious force, crushing Lewis into his seat. Through the small viewport, he saw the sky. It was not blue. It was a churning vortex of red smoke and orange fire. Anti-air batteries, Rowan shouted. Evasive maneuvers. Explosions blossomed outside the window, shaking the ship so hard, Lewis's teeth rattled. Shields at 40%, Tarek yelled, his four hands flying across a control panel on his lap. We are taking fire from the ridge, Maya shouted, her cynicism replaced by professional urgency. Brace for impact, Lewis squeezed his eyes shut. This is it, he thought. I am going to die because of a wobbly caster wheel. My tombstone will read, "Here lies Lewis, he should have called maintenance." A massive impact rocked the ship. Metal shrieked a terrible tearing sound, like a god screaming. The artificial gravity failed. Lewis floated up against his harness weightless, as the interior of the ship filled with smoke and sparks. Hull breach, Tarek roared. Screw this screw in particular. Get down, Maya screamed at Lewis. The world spun. Fire engulfed the cockpit. The last thing Lewis saw was a piece of the ceiling peeling away to reveal the burning sky of Ashfall 9 rushing up to meet them. Then darkness. Lewis woke to the smell of burning plastic and the taste of copper. He was lying on his back. The sky above him was a bruised purple, choked with ash. Large flakes of gray soot drifted down like snow coating his visor. He groaned and tried to sit up. His body screamed in protest, but miraculously, nothing seemed broken. The oversized armor, despite its poor fit, had done its job. It had absorbed the impact that should have turned him into paste. He looked around. The crash site was a graveyard of twisted metal. The iron belly was gone, scattered across a rocky ravine in a dozen burning pieces. Captain, Lewis croaked. Dr. Vance Tarek. Silence answered him, save for the crackle of fires. His heads-up display HUD flickered to life, projecting jagged red text across his vision. System error, connection to Helios hub lost. Squad status, unknown, offline. Armor integrity, 62%. Weapon uncalibrated. He was alone. He was alone on a planet where the atmosphere tasted like sulfur, and the locals ate rocks for breakfast. Lewis scrambled to his feet, panic rising in his chest like bile. He fumbled for the weapon, magnetized to his thigh. It was a standard-issue pulse rifle. He had never fired one. He had ordered 2 million of them, approved the shipping manifests, and audited the energy consumption reports, but he had never actually held the damn thing. It felt heavy and cold. A sound reached him, a grinding noise, like tectonic plates rubbing together. Lewis froze. Emerging from the smoke 50 meters away was a nightmare. It was a Vraxian, standing nearly 3 meters tall. It looked like a statue carved from obsidian and granite, but animated by an inner fire. Magma pulsed through cracks in its stony skin, glowing a fierce orange. It carried a weapon that looked like a jagged spear made of solidified lava. The Vraxian turned its head a featureless slab of rock with 2 burning slits for eyes. It saw Lewis. It did not roar. It did not charge. It simply made a low, rumbling sound that sounded terrifyingly like laughter. It began to walk toward him, slow and inevitable, dragging its spear across the ground. Sparks flew where the weapon touched the rock. Lewis raised his rifle. His hands were shaking so hard, the barrel was vibrating. "Go away!" he shouted, his voice cracking. "I am non-combatant personnel. I have administrative immunity." The Vraxian did not seem to care about administrative immunity. It raised its spear, the tip glowing white-hot. Lewis squeezed the trigger. Nothing happened. Error. Safety engaged. "Oh, for the love of—" Lewis frantically fumbled with the sight of the gun. The Vraxian was 20 meters away now. It was picking up speed, the ground shaking with each footfall. "Safety, safety!" Lewis hyperventilated. He found the switch and flipped it. He aimed again and pulled the trigger. A bolt of blue energy spat out, sailing 3 meters over the Vraxian's left shoulder. The alien warrior stopped. It tilted its head. It seemed insulted that this tiny, soft creature had missed so badly. It roared then, a sound like a mountain collapsing, and charged. Lewis backpedaled, tripping over a piece of debris. He landed hard on his rear. The Vraxian was 10 meters away. 5. "Computer!" Lewis screamed at his HUD. "Help me!" Voice command recognized. Available protocols: 1. Standard infantry assist. 2. Logistics override. 3. Experimental tactical algorithm beta. Lewis's mind flashed back. 6 months ago. A memo from the RD department. They were testing a new combat algorithm that used predictive logistics AI to calculate bullet trajectories based on resource optimization, in this case minimizing the shots needed to kill. He had approved the budget for it, thinking it was a waste of money. "Option 3, Lewis shrieked. "Execute Option 3. Warning, algorithm is unstable. Just do it." The Vraxian raised its spear for the killing blow. Suddenly, Lewis's vision changed. The red static of the HUD vanished, replaced by a calm, cool blue grid. Time seemed to slow down. The world became a series of mathematical vectors. A green box appeared on the Vraxian's chest, right where 2 plates of obsidian armor met. A percentage hovered over it. Structural weakness, 99%. A dotted line drew itself from the barrel of Lewis's gun to that green box. Adjusting servo motors, Lewis felt his arms move, not by his own will, but guided by the suit. The armor locked his joints. The gun stabilized instantly. Firing solution, calculated. His finger pulled the trigger. Fut, fut, fut. 3 shots. Not a spray of panic fire, but 3 distinct, rhythmically perfect bolts of plasma. The first bolt hit the Vraxian's chest, shattering the outer layer of cooled magma. The second bolt hit the exact same spot, burrowing into the superheated core. The third bolt followed the tunnel created by the first 2 and detonated inside the creature. The Vraxian froze. The light in its eyes flickered. Then, with a sound like a boiler exploding, its chest cavity ruptured. Molten rock sprayed outward, and the giant crumbled into a pile of smoking rubble. Lewis lowered the gun. He stared at the pile of rocks. Target neutralized. Ammunition expenditure: 3 rounds. Efficiency rating optimal. "Holy," Lewis breathed. "I just deleted it." He scrambled to his feet, adrenaline flooding his system. He was alive. He was a spreadsheet wizard, and he had just mathematically canceled a monster. He checked his map. The connection to the satellite was spotty, but he picked up a faint transponder signal. Ember Ridge Base, 12 kilometers north. He had to move. The Vraxian were not solitary creatures. Lewis began to navigate through the wreckage of the Iron Belly. He was looking for supplies, maybe a working radio, or perhaps a miraculous escape pod that would take him back to his desk. As he climbed over a twisted section of the fuselage, he heard a cough. It was weak wet, and definitely not human. Lewis froze, raising his rifle. The blue grid flickered in his vision, hungry for another target. He crept forward, peering over a slab of hull plating. Buried under a pile of steel beams and crushed concrete was a figure. It was humanoid, but slight. It wore armor, but not the bulky plating of the Alliance or the rock skin of the Vraxian. This armor was sleek, segmented, and painted in matte grays and oranges. But it was the head that caught Lewis's attention. The figure wore a mask, a stylized porcelain white mask, resembling a fox with slanted eye slits and intricate red markings. Protruding from the top of the helmet were two large triangular ears, covered in russet fur. And pinned beneath a heavy beam was a long, bushy tail thick with dust and soot. A Volpari. Lewis's breath hitched. The Volpari were mercenaries, spies, assassins. In this war, some clans fought for the Alliance, some for the Vraxian, and some just for whoever paid the most. They were enigmatic, deadly, and untrustworthy. The figure moved, trying to pull its leg free, but the beam was too heavy. The fox mask turned toward Lewis. Lewis aimed his gun. The targeting computer spun up. Target acquired, Volpari combatant. Probability of hostility, 80%. Recommended action, eliminate. The Volpari stopped struggling. She looked at the gun, then up at Lewis. She did not reach for a weapon. She simply slumped back against the debris, her chest heaving. "Well," a female voice came from behind the mask. It was smooth, melodious, and spoke perfect Alliance standard. "Are you going to shoot, or are you just going to stand there looking like a lost appliance?" Lewis blinked. "You speak standard." "I speak 6 languages," she retorted, though her voice was strained with pain. "And in all of them, pointing a gun at a trapped person is considered rude. If you are going to kill me, do it. My leg is crushed and I am out of patience." Lewis looked at the green box hovering over her head. Kill, shot available. He looked at her tail, which was twitching faintly in distress. He looked at the blood, bright orange blood, pooling under her trapped leg. He was a logistics officer. His job was to optimize. Killing a helpless enemy wasted ammunition. Leaving a potential asset to die wasted information. "Damn it," Lewis muttered. He lowered the gun. "Do not make me regret this." He moved forward, slinging the rifle over his shoulder. He grabbed the steel beam trapping her leg. "What are you doing?" she asked, wary. "Leverage," Lewis grunted. "Physics, Archimedes, pivot point." He jammed a piece of scrap metal under the beam and threw his entire weight onto it. The servo motors in his oversized armor whined. The beam groaned and lifted just a few inches. "Move," Lewis yelled. The Volpari was fast. Despite the injury, she blurred into motion, rolling out from under the trap just as Lewis let the beam crash back down. She lay on her back, panting. She reached up and clicked a latch on her helmet. With a hiss of depressurization, the fox mask detached. Lewis stared. She was stunning in a sharp, predatory way. High cheekbones, skin the color of pale moonlight, and eyes that were a piercing electric amber. Her hair was a messy tumble of red and white. 2 human-like ears were visible on the sides of her head, but the large fox ears atop her skull twitched independently, swiveling to track the sounds of the dying ship. She sat up, checking her leg. The armor was dented, but the limb seemed intact. She looked at Lewis, her eyes narrowing. "You are weird," she said. "I am efficient," Lewis corrected, trying to sound braver than he felt. "My name is Carter, Lewis Carter." "Irene," she said. She stood up, wincing slightly, but masked it quickly. She dusted off her tail with a dignity that seemed out of place in a garbage heap. "You are not a soldier, Lewis Carter. You hold that gun like it is a diseased rodent." I am a logistics officer, Lewis said, offended. I maximize supply chains. Irene laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound. A button pusher. Here did you get lost on the way to the cafeteria? I pressed the wrong button, Lewis admitted, his face heating up. Irene paused. She looked at him. Really. Looked at him as if trying to decide if he was a genius or an idiot. You deployed yourself to HFY 9 by accident. The interface is poorly designed. Unbelievable. She shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. Well, button pusher. Unless you have a spreadsheet that can stop a Vraxian hunting party, we need to move. My ears tell me there are 3 heavy units approaching from the east. You can hear them. I can hear their heartbeats through the ground, Irene said, tapping her large furry ear. And right now, their hearts are beating for murder. Ember Ridge is north, Lewis said, pointing. If we can get there. If we get there, your people might shoot me, Irene pointed out. I am Vulpari. My clan is currently unaligned. I will vouch for you, Lewis said. I saved you. That creates a debt, right? A transactional balance. Irene's eyes glinted with amusement. A transactional balance? You really are a clerk. Fine. You get me to the ridge without getting me shot, and I will get you there without getting you eaten. Deal da. Deal. They moved out, leaving the smoking wreckage behind. The journey was a blur of terror and strange camaraderie. Irene moved like smoke, silent and fluid. Lewis clanked along like a bag of wrenches, but his HUD, fueled by the tactical algorithm, kept them alive. Twice they ran into Vraxian scouts. The first time Irene smelled them before they were visible. She signaled Lewis to stop. She disappeared into the shadows, and 30 seconds later, Lewis heard the wet thud of a blade entering soft tissue between stone plates. She returned, wiping orange blood from a vibro knife. Messy, she critiqued. Inefficient. The second time they were pinned down by a sniper. Lewis's HUD calculated the sniper's position based on the angle of the plasma burns on the rocks. 400 meters azimuth, 210 elevation 40, Lewis called out. Distraction, Irene ordered. Lewis popped up and fired a suppression burst perfectly calculated to scorch the rock face right in front of the sniper's scope. The sniper flinched. In that second, Irene crossed the open ground, scaled a vertical wall with impossible grace, and silenced the threat. You make a decent decoy, she told him, when he caught up, breathless. I am a tactical distraction unit, Lewis wheezed. It is a specialized role. I bet. As night fell, the sky of HFY 9 turned from red to a deep, bruising purple. They reached the crest of a hill overlooking the Ember Ridge. Below them lay the Alliance base. It was a fortress of durasteel, ringed by defensive turrets that were spewing streams of tracer fire into the darkness. The Vraxian army was a sea of glowing magma veins surrounding the walls. But beyond the base, dominating the horizon, was the reason for all this death. The Ember Gate. It was a ring of colossal proportions, easily 5 kilometers in diameter, hovering vertically above the planet's surface. It was not powered down. It was active. Inside the ring, a swirling vortex of blue and orange energy churned, defying the laws of physics. It looked like a tear in the fabric of reality, a window into a place that was both beautiful and terrified. Lewis stared at it. He had seen pictures in the logistics files, Asset 99 Alpha, but seeing it in person was different. It felt heavy. It felt alive. That is a lot of supply chain potential, Lewis whispered. Irene did not speak. She stood beside him, her fox ears flattened against her head. Her amber eyes reflected the swirling light of the gate. She looked at it, not with the tactical appraisal of a soldier, nor the administrative awe of a clerk. She looked at it with recognition and fear. It is awake, Irene murmured so softly, Lewis almost missed it. What? Lewis asked. Irene snapped out of her trance. She put her mask back on, hiding her face. Nothing. Just foxes like doors. Especially doors that should remain shut. She turned to him. Ready to run the gauntlet, button pusher. The hardest part is the last mile. Lewis checked his HUD. Ammunition 80%. Armor 50%. Heart rate critical. He looked at the burning base, then at the mysterious foxwoman beside him. He realized with a sinking feeling that his accidental button press hadn't just sent him to the wrong place. It had sent him to the most important place in the galaxy. I have a schedule to keep, Lewis said, gripping his rifle. Let's go optimize this mess. Getting into Ember Ridge was less like entering a military stronghold, and more like diving through a burning hoop while blindfolded. The approach had been a sprint through a kill box. Lewis Carter, his lungs burning, and his oversized armor clanking like a bag of loose bolts, had followed Irene's blurred silhouette through the jagged rocks. Tracers zipped past them, angry lines of light that hissed in the thin air. When they reached the perimeter gate, 50 rifles were immediately pointed at them. Halt! Identify! A voice boomed from the guard tower. Don't shoot! Lewis screamed, waving his arms frantically. I have administrative clearance. I am a logistics officer. My employee ID is 4992 Alpha. He is human, someone yelled. And what is that thing with him? Another voice demanded. Irene stopped, her hands raised, but her posture relaxed, almost bored. That thing, she called out, her voice amplified by her helmet, is the only reason your supply officer here is not currently being digested by a Vraxian hunting pack. A Vraxian mortar shell whistled overhead, landing dangerously close to the gate. The blast wave threw dirt and shrapnel against the durasteel walls. A young private near the gate froze, staring up at the second incoming shell with wide, terrified eyes. In a motion too fast for Lewis to track, Irene snatched a discarded kinetic shield generator from the ground, vaulted over a barricade, and slammed the device down in front of the private. The shield flared to life, a shimmering blue hexagon, just as the second shell impacted. The explosion washed over them, but the shield held. Irene dusted off her shoulder armor. You are welcome, she said dryly. The gate groaned open. Hands grabbed Lewis and dragged him inside. Irene was surrounded by 10 guards, weapons drawn, but they didn't fire. They had seen what she did. Secure the Volpari, a sergeant barked. Get the human to command. Lewis was shoved through the chaotic interior of Ember Ridge. The base was a hive of desperate activity. Medics ran past with stretchers floating on anti-grav pads. Engineers welded armor plates onto battered tanks. The air smelled of ozone, burnt meat, and fear. They marched him into the command center, a bunker buried deep beneath the rock. At the center of the room stood a holographic table displaying the tactical situation, and leaning over it was Commander Holt. Holt was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite and then left out in the rain for 50 years. He had a scar running from his left eye to his jaw, and his uniform was pressed with a sharpness that defied the filth outside. So, Holt said, not looking up from the map. You are the package the hub said was lost. Carter, logistics. Yes, sir, Lewis panted, trying to stand at attention but failing due to the weight of his greaves. There was an error in the deployment algorithm. I need to contact Helios Hub to arrange extraction. My skill set is not suited for... Holt finally looked up. His eyes were cold, devoid of sympathy. Extraction, son, look at that screen. He gestured to the hologram. It showed a sea of red dots surrounding the base. We are encircled by 3 Vraxian legions, Holt said. Nothing comes in. Nothing goes out. The only reason you are breathing is because our anti-air batteries are barely holding their dropships back. You are not going home, Carter. You are meat for the grinder, just like the rest of us. But I am an administrator, Lewis protested. I optimize spreadsheets. Then optimize a rifle, Holt snapped. We are short on bodies. I don't care if you used to push pencils or clean toilets. If you can hold a gun, you are a soldier. And the Volpari, Lewis asked, finding a shred of courage. She saved my life. She saved your private at the gate, Holt sneered. A mercenary. Unaligned trash. We threw her in the brig. If the Vraxian break through, maybe we will use her as a bargaining chip. That is a mistake, Lewis said. The words came out before he could stop them. Statistically, utilizing local assets increases survival rates by 40% in siege scenarios. She knows their tactics. She is a force multiplier. Holt stepped closer, looming over Lewis. You are quoting statistics to me. I have been fighting this war, while you were deciding which font to use on your memos. Get out of my face. Report to the quartermaster. If you are good at counting, go count the ammo. We are running low. The quartermaster's depot was a disaster. It was a cavernous warehouse, filled with crates, but there was no order. Ammunition boxes were mixed with medical supplies. Food rations were buried under spare tank treads. It was a logistical nightmare that made Lewis's left eye twitch. It is chaos, Lewis whispered, horrified. It is unindexed chaos. He spent the next 6 hours doing the only thing he knew how to do: organizing. He didn't sleep. He barely ate. He hacked into the base's inventory system, using his administrative overrides, which thankfully still worked on the local network, and began to tag everything. As he worked, he noticed something strange in the data logs. He was cross-referencing the personnel manifest with the supply consumption rates when he found a hidden folder labeled Anomaly Log 77. Curiosity, the fatal flaw of every good administrator, took over. Lewis cracked the encryption. It was embarrassingly simple. The password was literally Password 123, a testament to the military's digital hygiene. Inside were hundreds of transfer orders, all of them flagged as system errors, all of them involving personnel with non-combat backgrounds, engineers, teachers, heavy-lift pilots, even a chef being redeployed to the front lines of Ashfall 9. It is not just me, Lewis muttered, scrolling through the list. Private Jenkins, former botany professor. Corporal Hideo, civilian architect. Why send people who don't know how to fight to the most dangerous place in the galaxy? He looked at the timestamps. The errors spiked whenever the Vraxian offensive intensified. It was almost as if the system was throwing bodies at the problem to see what stuck, to see who survived. A cold shiver ran down his spine. This wasn't a glitch. It was a stress test. Hey, spreadsheet! Lewis jumped. Standing in the doorway of the warehouse was a squad of soldiers. Leading them was Tarek, the Draven engineer from the dropship crash. He was alive, missing one of his 4 arms, but looking otherwise cheerful. Beside him was Dr. Maya Vance, covered in grime, but unharmed. Tarek, Maya. Lewis dropped his datapad. You made it. Of course we made it, Tarek clicked. I built a sled out of the fuselage. We rode it down the mountain like a bobsled. It was statistically incredibly dangerous and totally awesome. We heard you were down here reorganizing the bolts, Maya said, leaning against a crate of plasma grenades. Word is spreading. The gunners actually got their thermal clips on time today. They are calling you the Wizard of Warehousing. It is just basic sorting algorithms, Lewis said, flushing slightly. Listen, I need to ask you something. Have you noticed weird deployments? People who shouldn't be here. Maya's expression darkened. Half the medbay is full of kids who held a rifle for the first time yesterday. Why? I think someone is doing this on purpose, Lewis whispered. I think we are part of an experiment. Before Maya could respond, the alarms blared. Sector 4. Breach. All hands to battle stations. That is us, Tarek said, grabbing a heavy wrench. Come on, Carter. Time to see if your inventory count holds up. The battle for Sector 4 was a mess. The Vraxian had breached the outer wall, and magma-skinned warriors were pouring into the trench network. Lewis found himself crouched behind a barrier of sandbags, clutching his rifle. His HUD was screaming warnings. Target saturation high. Recommended action pray. Stop praying and start shooting, a sergeant yelled, shoving Lewis. Lewis popped up. He didn't aim with his eyes. He let the armor's tactical algorithm do the work. The blue grid appeared. He fired. A Vraxian warrior 300 meters away dropped its knee joint, shattered. "Nice shot, clerk," someone yelled. "It is just geometry," Lewis shouted back. He looked around. The line was holding, but barely. The ammunition runners were getting bogged down in the mud. The heavy gunners were shouting for power cells. "They are routing the supplies wrong," Lewis realized. "They are sending the cells to the left flank, but the heaviest fire is on the right." He tapped into his comms unit. "Command, this is Carter. You have a bottleneck at Junction 7. Reroute the supply drones through the maintenance tunnel on Level 2. It cuts the travel time by 3 minutes." "Who is this?" a harried voice crackled in his ear. "We don't have authorization for—" "Just do it," Lewis screamed. "Or the right flank runs dry in 90 seconds. There was a pause. Then the supply drones shifted direction. 2 minutes later, the heavy guns on the right flank roared back to life, shredding the incoming wave of Vraxian. The attack faltered. The Vraxian pulled back. Lewis slumped against the sandbags, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "Not bad," Maya said, dropping down beside him to check a wounded soldier. "You boss people around pretty well for a guy who used to maximize grain shipments." "It is the same principle," Lewis said, wiping sweat from his eyes. "Just louder." He looked toward the brig, a heavily reinforced blockhouse near the center of the camp. "I need to get Irene out." "Holt won't like that," Maya warned. "I don't care what Holt likes," Lewis said, standing up. "We need her, and I have leverage now." Lewis marched into Holt's office an hour later. He didn't salute. "I fixed your supply lines," Lewis said flatly. "And I increased your defensive efficiency by 12% in one skirmish." Holt looked at him, cigar smoke curling around his scarred face. "You want a medal, Carter?" "I want the Volpari," Lewis said. "Released. Into my custody." Holt laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. "You think because you move some boxes around you get to make demands that Fox is a security risk." "She is an asset," Lewis countered. "And if you don't release her, I will stop optimizing. I will let your inventory go back to chaos. I will let your ammo run dry at the wrong moments. You can court-martial me, you can shoot me, but until you do, your logistics will be a disaster." It was a bluff. A massive, terrifying bluff. Lewis was shaking inside his boots. Holt stared at him for a long, silent minute. Then he grinned. It wasn't a nice grin. "You have got stones, clerk. I will give you that. Fine. Take the Fox. But if she makes one wrong move, I will shoot her myself. And then I will shoot you." The brig was dark and smelled of damp concrete. Irene was sitting on the floor of her cell, meditating. Her armor was stripped off, leaving her in a black undersuit. Her fox mask sat on her knee. When the door hissed open, her ears twitched. She opened her amber eyes. "Took you long enough," she said. "I had to negotiate," Lewis said, unlocking the energy barrier. "Come on. You are drafted." Irene stood up, stretching. Her tail uncurled, swishing behind her. "Drafted. I usually charge a premium for my services." "Your payment is not dying in a cell," Lewis said, handing her armor back to her. "Fair enough." She began to strap the plates back on. "So, War Clerk, what is the situation?" "Bad," Lewis admitted. "We are besieged, and I think the Alliance is using this place as a testing ground. For people like me." Irene paused, holding her helmet. She looked at him with a strange intensity. "You are smarter than you look, Lewis. The Alliance has always loved its variables." "And you?" Lewis asked. "Why are you really here, Irene?" "A neutral Volpari, just happening to be near the Ember Gate." Irene slid the mask over her face. The electronic voice modulation clicked on. "Let's just say my clan has an interest in old doors, and making sure the wrong people don't knock." Over the next 3 days, Lewis and Irene became a fixture on the Ember Ridge defensive line. It was an odd partnership. Lewis was the brain constantly monitoring the flow of battle via his HUD, calling out enemy movements, redirecting supplies, and identifying structural weaknesses in the Vraxian formations. Irene was the blade. She moved where he directed, striking with surgical precision, disrupting enemy squads before they could form up. They fell into a rhythm. 3 targets Sector 9 behind the rock formation, Lewis would call out. On it, Irene would reply. A moment later, 3 distinct plasma signatures would vanish. You are scary, Lewis commented one evening as they sat on a crate eating ration bars. And you are annoying, Irene replied, though her tone was light. She had taken her mask off to eat. You micromanage. Irene moved 3 meters left. Irene conserves stamina. Do you ever stop calculating? It is how I stay alive, Lewis said. I can't fight like you. I can't lift a tank like Tarek. I can only process. It is working, she said. She took a bite of the tasteless nutrient bar and grimaced. You know Vulpari have 2 hearts. One for the body, one for the spirit. That is the saying anyway. It means we run hot. We burn energy fast. We need real meat, not this processed paste. I will see if I can requisition you a steak, Lewis joked. Careful, Carter. Keep making promises like that and I might start liking you. Lewis looked at her. In the dim light of the hangar, with the distant boom of artillery as a backdrop, she looked less like an alien mercenary and more like a person. A tired, beautiful person with fuzzy ears. Why do you call me war clerk? He asked. Because it fits, she said. You are a contradiction. You fight with paper and rules. It is cute, in a pathetic sort of way. Well, fox with a spreadsheet, Lewis retorted. At least I am organized. Irene laughed, her tail thumping rhythmically against the metal crate. That night, Lewis dreamed. He was back at Helios Hub, but the station was burning. Papers flew everywhere, manifests, death certificates, transfer orders. He saw Supervisor Halloway screaming silently as the vacuum of space sucked him out a window. Then the scene shifted. He saw the Ember Gate, but it wasn't just a ring of light. It was a mouth. A giant, hungry mouth that was whispering names. Carter, Carter. He woke up sweating, his heart pounding. The attack came at 0300 hours. It wasn't a probe. It was a push. The Vraxian had brought up a siege breaker, a massive walking artillery platform the size of a skyscraper. It pounded the energy shields of Ember Ridge with rhythmic, thundering blasts. Shields are failing, Tarek screamed over the comms. Generator 3 is gone. They are targeting the supply tunnels, Lewis realized, looking at his tactical map. If they cut the tunnels, we lose the ammo feed to the main turrets. We have to reinforce the tunnel entrance, Holt ordered. Alpha Squad, move out. Alpha Squad is dead, sir, a lieutenant yelled. Lewis looked at Irene. She nodded. We will go, Lewis said. You, Holt yelled. You are a clerk. I am the only one who knows the tunnel layout well enough to rig a bypass, Lewis shouted back. Irene provides cover. Tarek, I need your drones. They ran. The journey to the supply tunnel entrance was a nightmare. The air was thick with dust and plasma. Vraxian warriors were swarming over the walls. They reached the depot entrance just as a squad of Vraxian breached the perimeter. Hold them off, Lewis yelled, diving toward the control panel of a heavy lifter crane. Irene didn't need to be told twice. She drew 2 energy blades, wicked curved daggers that hummed with white light. She became a whirlwind of orange and gray. She didn't block. She dodged, weaving through the clumsy swings of the stone giants, slicing at their joints, their eyes, their exposed magma veins. Lewis's fingers flew across the crane's controls. Tarek, I need those drones to carry the ammo crates manually. The conveyor belt is broken. Uploading patch now, Tarek's voice crackled. A swarm of repair drones buzzed down, grabbing crates of plasma cells and rushing them toward the turrets. It is not enough, Lewis yelled. The Vraxian are pushing too hard. We need a barricade. He looked at the inventory list. Contents: flammable, hydrogel industrial grade. Quantity 5 tons. "Irene!" Lewis shouted. "Get clear of the main gate." "I am a little busy," she yelled back, ducking under a lava spear. 3 seconds. Lewis grabbed a remote control for a cargo hauler. He punched in a command. A massive automated truck loaded with barrels of blue gel roared out of the garage. Lewis drove it remotely, steering it straight into the breach, where the Vraxian were pouring in. Now, he fired a single shot from his rifle into the barrels as the truck slammed into the enemy line. The explosion was magnificent. The hydrogel didn't just burn, it stuck. A wall of blue fire erupted, sealing the breach instantly. The Vraxians screamed as the sticky flames coated their stone skin, superheating the rock until it cracked. "A firewall," Lewis panted. "Literally." The enemy advance halted. The turrets, now resupplied by the drones, opened up, shredding the remaining attackers. Silence returned to Ember Ridge, broken only by the crackle of cooling metal. Lewis sat on the bumper of a wrecked jeep, his hands shaking. He had done it. He had turned a spreadsheet entry into a weapon of mass destruction. Irene walked over. Her armor was scorched, and she was favoring her left leg again, but she was alive. "Not bad, war clerk," she said, sitting down beside him. She leaned her head on his shoulder. It was a heavy, trusting weight. "You fight dirty. I like it." "It was an allocation of volatile assets," Lewis mumbled, too tired to think. "Call it what you want. You saved us." Lewis looked at her. Her mask was off. Her face was smudged with soot, but her eyes were bright. Without thinking, he reached out and brushed a speck of ash from her cheek. Irene froze. Her ears swiveled forward. She didn't pull away. "You humans," she whispered. "You are so squishy, but you don't break." "We bounce," Lewis said softly. For a moment in the middle of hell, there was peace. Then Lewis's comms unit buzzed. It had been left open on a secure channel, a mistake, or perhaps another glitch. Voice 1, Holt. Defensive line held. The clerk's improvisation worked. Voice 2, unidentified, distorted, excellent. The variable is performing above expectations. Is the gate secure? Voice 1, for now. But if the Vraxian push again, we might lose the ridge. Voice 2, if the ridge falls, initiate Protocol Omega. Use the gate. We cannot let them have it. And Holt, if you have to use the gate, make sure the human Carter is near the epicenter. We need to see how the interface reacts to his unique profile. Voice 1, understood. He is just a resource. We will spend him if we have to. The channel clicked off. Lewis sat frozen. The coldness in his chest wasn't from the night air. It was the icy realization of what he was. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a hero. He was a lab rat. They were trying to get him near the gate. They wanted to see what would happen. He looked at Irene. Her eyes were wide. Her hearing was far better than his. She had heard it too, coming from his earpiece. "They want to kill you," she whispered. Or worse. Lewis stood up. The exhaustion vanished, replaced by a cold, hard anger. "They think I am a variable," Lewis said, his voice low and dangerous. "They think I am just a number in a column." He looked up at the Ember Gate, swirling silently in the night sky. "Well," Lewis Carter said, checking the charge on his rifle. "They are about to find out what happens when the numbers start shooting back." "What are we going to do?" Irene asked, standing up with him. Her tail lashed angrily behind her. "We are going to survive," Lewis said. "And then, we are going to audit them. With extreme prejudice." His HUD chimed. A message from Helios Hub. Notification. Field promotion. User Carter Lewis. New rank Tactical Specialist Provisional. Access level restricted. Lewis laughed. It was a bitter, jagged sound. "Provisional," he mocked. "They gave me a promotion so I can die with a better title." He turned to Irene. "Get Tarek and Maya. We need to talk. If we are going to be pawns, We are going to be the most difficult, stubborn, sharp-edged pawns they have ever played with." Irene grinned, her teeth sharp and white. She put her mask back on. "I will get the tools," she said. "You bring the plan." Lewis looked back at the command bunker, where Holt sat plotting his demise. "You want logistics," Lewis thought. "I will show you the logistics of revenge." The strategic situation at Ember Ridge had devolved from critical to mathematically impossible. Inside the command bunker, the holographic map was a sea of red icons swarming the lone blue island of the base. The air recyclers were struggling to filter out the smell of ozone and desperation. Commander Holt stood by the table, his face a mask of granite, watching the perimeter integrity drop by another 2%. "We are bleeding out," Holt said, his voice flat. "Ammo reserves at 12%. Medical supplies are critical. The Vraction will overrun the outer wall in 6 hours." Lewis Carter stood opposite him. His oversized armor was now scuffed and scorched, covered in the gray dust of Ashfall 9. He looked less like a lost accountant, and more like a piece of office equipment that had been dragged through a blast furnace. "We cannot hold the wall," Lewis said, pointing to a cluster of blinking nodes behind the enemy lines. "But we don't have to. The Vraction are coordinating their assault from these 3 forward command posts. They are using a triangulated signal to synchronize their heavy artillery." "We know that, Carter," Holt snapped. "But we don't have the manpower for a frontal assault." "I am not proposing a frontal assault," Lewis replied, his finger tracing a jagged line through the ruins of the old city surrounding the Ember Gate. "I am proposing a logistical disruption. A surgical strike team moves through the ruins here. Sector 4 bypasses the main force and hits the central command node. If we take that out, their coordination collapses. They will turn into a mob instead of an army." Holt stared at the map. "Sector 4 is a death trap. It is full of unstable ruins, rogue drones, and Vraxian patrols. It is also the only route with enough structural interference to mask our thermal signatures," Lewis countered. "I ran the probability models. It is a 19% chance of success." 19% is suicide. "Standing here is 0%, Lewis said. "And if we fail, you can blame it on the incompetence of the logistics officer who pressed the wrong button. It cleans up your report nicely." Holt looked at Lewis for a long moment. There was no respect in his eyes, only calculation. He saw a disposable asset offering to dispose of itself. "Take what you need," Holt said. "If you are not back in 12 hours, I am sealing the gate behind you." The squad assembled at the north airlock 10 minutes later. It was a motley crew, the kind that would give a parade sergeant a stroke. There was Tarek, the 4-armed Draven engineer, welding a second plasma cutter onto his remaining upper limb. There was Dr. Maya Vance checking her medical kit with grim efficiency. There were 3 other Alliance soldiers, a heavy gunner named Jax, whose armor was painted with crude shark teeth, and 2 silent snipers from the Krell species, who communicated entirely by clicking their mandibles. And there was Irene. She was sitting on a crate of grenades, sharpening her vibro knife. She had removed her helmet. Her face, pale and sharp-featured, was smudged with grease. Her large fox ears swiveled toward Lewis as he approached, and her bushy tail lay curled around her boots like a sleeping pet. 19%, Irene asked, not looking up. "You are getting optimistic, War Clerk." "I rounded up," Lewis admitted, checking the charge on his rifle. "It was actually 18.4. "Comforting," she said, sheathing the knife. She stood up, towering slightly over him. "You realize that if we die out there, I am going to haunt you. Volpari ghosts are very loud." "If we die, I won't have to fill out the equipment loss forms," Lewis said. "So there is a silver lining." The airlock hissed open, revealing the ruined cityscape of Ashfall 9. Before the war, this city had been a bustling trade hub supporting the Ember Gate. Now it was a skeleton. Skyscrapers of glass and steel had been reduced to jagged fangs pointing at the sky. The streets were choked with rubble and twisted metal. Holographic billboards powered by dying backup generators flickered intermittently, advertising luxury vacations and soft drinks to an audience of corpses and war machines. "Move out," Lewis ordered. "Keep tight. Tarek, watch for mines. Irene, you are on point." They moved into the shadows. The first hour was an exercise in tension. They navigated through the husk of a shopping district, stepping over shattered storefronts. Every sound, a shifting metal beam, a gust of wind howling through a broken window, sounded like a Vraxian ambush. Irene moved with a grace that made Lewis feel like a clumsy ox. She didn't walk, she flowed. Her ears were constantly moving, twitching, at frequencies human hearing couldn't register. "Stop," she whispered, suddenly raising a hand. The squad froze. "What is it?" Lewis hissed. "Wind," Irene said softly. "It changed. It is carrying the scent of ozone and coolant." She pointed her tail, literally pointed it rigid, and straight toward a collapsed overpass 300 meters ahead. "Drone swarm, hovering in standby mode. If we cross that intersection, their thermal sensors will pick us up." Lewis tapped his HUD. "I don't see them on the scanner." "Your scanner looks for active heat," Irene said. "They are masking their heat, but they cannot mask the smell of their stabilizers. The air turbulence sounds different." "Okay," Lewis said, trusting her instantly. "How do we get past?" Irene looked around. She spotted a shattered vent shaft leading underground. "We go low. Or," she looked at Lewis, a mischievous glint in her amber eyes, "we use your tail." "I don't have a tail," Lewis reminded her. "No, but your armor has a heat sink," she said. "Vulpari use our tails to regulate body heat. We can fan it out to dissipate signature, or wrap it tight to hold it in. Your suit, it vents heat from the back right." "Yes. If we overload the vent for 2 seconds, it creates a thermal flare," Irene explained. "The drones will track the flare. While they are investigating the hotspot, we sprint through the cold zone." "That will overheat my core," Lewis protested. "My suit will shut down." "Only for 10 seconds, Irene shrugged. "You can hold your breath, can't you?" Lewis sighed. "Fine. Tarek, get ready to run." Lewis overrode the safety protocols on his armor's cooling system. He initiated a manual purge. A blast of superheated air erupted from his backpack, creating a blossoming flower of heat on the thermal spectrum. Instantly, a dozen black shapes detached from the overpass, buzzing like angry hornets as they dove toward the heat source. "Go!" Irene hissed. They sprinted across the intersection while the drones circled the dissipating heat cloud behind them. They made it into the cover of a collapsed bank, just as the drones realized they had been duped. "See," Irene said, patting Lewis on the shoulder as he gasped for air, his suit screaming warnings about core temperature. "You are learning. You make a pretty good fox for a hairless ape." "I hate this," Lewis wheezed. "I really hate this." They pushed deeper into the city. The resistance grew stiffer. They fought a running battle through a holographic zoo trading fire, with Vraxian scouts amidst flickering projections of extinct animals. During a lull in the fighting, they took shelter in what used to be a logistics dispatch center. It was a cruel irony that made Lewis pause. He saw rows of dusty terminals, shattered desks, and a skeletal corpse still wearing a headset. "He was just like me," Lewis murmured, looking at the name tag on the corpse. "Dispatcher 44. Just moving boxes." They found a group of survivors, huddled in the basement prisoners the Vraxian had been using for labor. There were 20 of them, humans driven, and a few other species, all emaciated and terrified. Maya immediately set to work treating the wounded. Tarek used his plasma cutter to slice off their shackles. One of the prisoners, a human man with graying hair and a tattered uniform, grabbed Lewis's arm. "You are Alliance," the man rasped. "Is the fleet here?" "Just us," Lewis said gently. "We are a strike team." The man stared at Lewis's insignia. "Logistics." "What is logistics doing here?" "Long story," Lewis said. "What is your name, soldier?" "Colonel Vance," the man said. Retired. I was pulled back in just like everyone else. He looked at Lewis closely. Carter. You look like you are related to David Carter. Lewis froze. David is my brother. He is stationed on the cruiser Aegis, rearguard duty. The colonel shook his head slowly, his eyes filled with pity. Son, the Aegis was destroyed 3 weeks ago, in the Vale Nebula. Lewis felt the blood drain from his face. No, that is impossible. I saw his transfer orders. He was sent to a safe zone, Sector 8. That is what the orders said, the colonel coughed. But I was in command when the real orders came through. They needed a decoy to draw the Vraxian fleet away from a Tabana gas refinery. They sent the Aegis with a skeleton crew and rigged transponders. They sent them to die to save the profit margins on the gas. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Lewis gripped his rifle until his knuckles turned white. David was dead. His brother, who sent him goofy messages about gravity ball scores, was dead. Not in a heroic last stand, but as a distraction. A line item written off to save a refinery. They lied, Lewis whispered. The system lied. The system does not lie, Carter, the colonel said bitterly. It calculates, and we just didn't add up. Rage cold and sharp as a diamond crystallized in Lewis's chest. It wasn't the panic of the crash or the fear of the Vraxian. It was pure distilled hatred for the invisible hands that moved them, like pieces on a board. Irene was watching him. She didn't say anything, but she moved closer, her presence a silent anchor. We are getting you out, Lewis told the colonel, his voice steady, but terrifyingly devoid of emotion. Tarek Jax, escort the prisoners back to the perimeter. Maya, go with them. What? Maya protested. We need every gun. I am not risking them, Lewis said. And I am not stopping. Irene and I will hit the command node. We move faster alone. Lewis, Maya started. Go, Lewis ordered. It wasn't a request. It was a command from someone who was done playing by the rules. As the others left, Lewis stood in the dark basement, staring at a blank wall. You okay? Irene asked softly. No, Lewis said. I am going to burn it down, Irene. Not just the Vraxian, all of it. The hub, the algorithm, the people who think my brother was worth less than a gas shipment. Irene stepped in front of him. In the gloom, her amber eyes glowed. She reached out and took his hand, his armored, clumsy hand, in her sleek, gloved one. Then let's burn it, she said. But first we survive tonight. They made camp in the upper floors of a shattered skyscraper, overlooking the glowing crater, where the Vraxian command node pulsed with energy. A small fire, fueled by smokeless chemical bricks, flickered between them. Lewis sat staring into the flames, cleaning his rifle with mechanical precision. Irene sat opposite him. She had taken off her chest plate, revealing the black undersuit and the lithe, powerful muscles beneath. She was grooming her tail, combing the dust out of the thick fur with her fingers. It was an intimate domestic act that seemed jarringly out of place in a war zone. You are staring, she said, not looking up. Sorry, Lewis said, averting his eyes. I have just never seen a Volpari relax. We don't relax often, she said. But my tail was heavy with dust. It throws off my balance. She paused, then looked at him. About your brother. I am sorry, Lewis. He was a good man, Lewis said. Better than me. He actually believed in the Alliance. Belief is a dangerous luxury, Irene said. Volpari believe in debts and pacts. She shifted closer to the fire. There is a story in my clan about the first fox. She was alone hunting in the winter. She met a wolf who was caught in a trap. The wolf told her to leave him, that he was dead weight. But the fox, she wrapped her tail around his frozen leg to keep the blood flowing. She stayed until spring. Irene looked at Lewis, her gaze intense. When a Volpari wraps their tail around someone, it is not just for warmth. It is a promise. It means, your enemies are my enemies. Your blood is my blood. Without breaking eye contact, she uncurled her tail from her lap. It extended across the small space between them. The soft, russet fur brushed against Lewis's armored knee, then curled gently around his wrist. It was warm. Incredibly warm. "I cannot promise you will win, Lewis," she whispered. "But I promise you will not be the only one bleeding." Lewis looked at the tail wrapped around his arm. He felt a lump in his throat that had nothing to do with smoke. He reached out and awkwardly patted the fur. "That is highly inefficient of you," he managed to joke, though his voice cracked. "Taking on my bad luck." Irene smirked, her ears flicking. "I like bad odds. Now get some sleep, war clerk. Tomorrow we destroy a command center." She didn't retract her tail. Lewis fell asleep with the warmth of it anchoring him to the ground, the only real thing in a world of ghosts. The next morning, the war clerk went to work. They approached the Vraxian command node, a massive temporary fortress built into the ruins of a stadium. It was guarded by 3 rings of automated turrets and patrols of heavy infantry. "We can't sneak in," Irene assessed, peering through her scope. "Too many eyes." "We don't need to sneak," Lewis said, pulling up his datapad. "We just need to make a delivery." He pointed to a line of Vraxian hover barges approaching the rear entrance. "Those are supply barges. They are automated. They use a simple QR code identification system. And I have a portable label printer," Lewis said, patting his pouch. "And I know the override codes for their inventory management system. I read the manual for their captured tech back at the ridge." 30 minutes later, Lewis and Irene were crouching behind a pile of rubble as a Vraxian barge rumbled past. Lewis slapped a magnetic sticker onto its hull. The sticker didn't say explosives. It read, "Priority shipment, commander's personal rations." The barge's scanner read the code. The turrets, programmed to prioritize command supplies, immediately lowered their guns and opened the inner gate. "Unbelievable," Irene whispered. "You are hacking them with bureaucracy." "Every army marches on its stomach," Lewis said, "and every AI is programmed to fear a hungry commander." They slipped inside the perimeter, shadowing the barge. Once inside the courtyard, they broke away, heading for the central data spire. The fighting started in the corridors. It was brutal close-quarters combat. Irene was a blur of motion, her vibro knives flashing. Lewis covered her, his rifle barking rhythmic bursts. He used his logistics vision, the tactical algorithm, to call out threats. 2 on the left, flanking. Got them. Grenade Sector 3. Clear. They fought their way to the main control room. Lewis slapped a breaching charge on the door. Boom, they stormed in. The room was filled with Vraxian technicians who scrambled for weapons. Irene neutralized 3 of them before they could draw. Lewis shot out the control panels for the automated defenses. Standing at the back of the room behind a shimmering energy shield was not a Vraxian warlord. It was a human. He was wearing a pristine, high-collared uniform of the Alliance High Command. He was sipping a cup of synthetic tea, looking at the tactical screens with mild interest. "Director Kale," Lewis breathed. He recognized the face. Kale was the head of strategic operations, the man who signed the orders, the man who probably signed David's death warrant. Kale turned. He looked surprised, but not frightened. "Well," Kale said, setting down his tea. "This is unexpected. Private Carter, I thought you would be dead by now. The statistical model gave you a survival probability of 0.03%. "I am a logistics officer," Lewis said, stepping over a Vraxian corpse, his gun trained on Kale's chest. "And you have some explaining to do." "Explaining," Kale chuckled. "To you, you are a rounding error, Carter. A glitch." "Why are you here?" Irene demanded, her knives out. "Why is an Alliance director in a Vraxian command post?" "Coordination, my dear Fox," Kale said smoothly. "This war has become stagnant. The Ember Gate requires pressure to open fully. We needed the Vraxian to push harder, so I provided them with some tactical data. Just enough to threaten the ridge, but not enough to take it immediately. "You are helping them," Lewis yelled. "You killed my brother. You killed thousands of people just to apply pressure." "It is optimization," Cale said, his voice cold. "The gate is a weapon, Carter. A weapon that can end all wars. But it needs a catalyst. It reacts to desperation, to mass casualty events. We are farming tragedy to harvest a miracle." "You are insane," Lewis said. "You are not optimizing. You are butchering." "I am making the hard choices," Cale snapped. "Do you think I like this? Do you think I enjoy the spreadsheets of the dead? But humanity is weak. We need the gate. And if I have to spend a few thousand lives to secure a future for billions, that is a bargain I will make every time." Lewis lowered his aim slightly. "You are wrong. People aren't currency. You can't spend them." "Spoken like a clerk," Cale sneered. "You see the individual box. I see the warehouse." Cale tapped a console on his wrist. "Self-destruct sequence initiated," a computerized voice announced. 2 minutes to detonation." "You won't shoot me," Cale said confidently. "I am the only one who knows the shutdown codes for the gate's failsafe. If you kill me, the gate overloads and takes this whole planet with it." He pressed a button, and a teleportation node behind him flared to life. "Goodbye, Carter. Try not to survive this time. It messes up my data." Lewis lunged, but the energy shield blocked him. Cale stepped backward into the light and vanished. "The station is going to blow," Irene yelled. "We have to go—" "No!" Lewis slammed his fist against the shield. "He got away. Lewis, now!" Irene grabbed him by the harness and dragged him toward the service exit. They sprinted. The building shook as explosions began to ripple through the lower levels. Fire chased them down the corridors. They burst out of a side door just as the stadium collapsed inward, a cloud of dust and fire swallowing the command node. They tumbled down a slope of debris, coughing and bruised. They had destroyed the command post. The Vraxian coordination would shatter. But Cale was gone, and he had admitted to something far worse than treason. They found themselves in an old subway tunnel, deep beneath the city. It was cool and dark, vibrating with the aftershocks of the explosion above. "We failed," Lewis said, leaning against the damp wall. "He is gone." "We stopped the Vraxian attack," Irene said, checking her knives. "That is not failure." She looked down the tunnel. It stretched on into darkness, but there was a faint blue pulse of light coming from the deep. "Where does this go?" Lewis asked. "Ideally away from the fire," Irene said. They walked in silence for a mile. The air grew colder, charged with static electricity. The blue light grew brighter. Suddenly, the tunnel opened up into a massive cavern. And there it was, the foundation of the Ember Gate. They were directly beneath the colossal ring. Massive pillars of unknown metal anchored it to the planet's core. The air here hummed with power. It wasn't just machinery. It felt like standing inside a giant lung that was slowly breathing. Lewis stared up at the underside of the gate. It was terrifying and majestic. Then he heard it. Human found. It wasn't a sound. It was a thought pushed directly into his brain. It tasted like copper and old starlight. Lewis stumbled. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" Irene asked, scanning the perimeter. "The voice. It said found." Irene froze. She spun around, looking at the gate with wide, terrified eyes. Her ears flattened against her skull. "No," she whispered. "It is too soon. It shouldn't be awake yet." "Irene," Lewis asked, stepping closer to her. "What do you know?" She looked at him, and for the first time Lewis saw true fear in her face. Not fear of death, but fear of something much older. "It knows you, Lewis," she said, her voice trembling. "The gate. It wasn't Cale who brought you here. It wasn't a glitch." She backed away from him slightly. "It called you." Before Lewis could ask what she meant, the ground beneath them began to glow. The runes etched into the foundation of the gate runes, that looked suspiciously like the markings on Irene's mask, flared to life. The Ember Gate was listening, and it had just recognized a familiar frequency. The datapad in Lewis Carter's hand cast a pale, corpse-like blue light onto the damp walls of the subway tunnel. The air was thick with the smell of stagnant water and the lingering ozone of the explosion they had left behind at the surface. But Lewis could not smell it. He could only see the scrolling text of the file he had pulled from Director Kale's terminal. It was a document titled Project Omega Phase 2. "He is insane," Lewis whispered the words, scraping out of his dry throat. "He is mathematically, statistically insane." Dr. Maya Vance kneeled beside him, checking the bandage on Tarek's remaining arm. "What is it, Lewis? What did you find?" "Kale is not just trying to win the battle for Ashfall 9, Lewis said, looking up. His eyes were hollow-haunted by the numbers he had just read. "He is planning a decapitation strike. He intends to force the Ember Gate open to its maximum aperture, something that has never been tested, and bridge a direct wormhole into the heart of the Vraxian home system." Tarek clicked his mandibles, a sound of agitated metal. A direct bridge. The energy requirements would be infinite. The structural stress on local space-time would be catastrophic. "Kale knows," Lewis replied. "The report estimates a 40% chance of a localized spatial collapse. If that happens, Ashfall 9, the fleet and everything within 3 parsecs vanishes into a singularity. Billions of people. Gone." "And the other 60%?" Irene asked. She was standing a little apart from them, staring into the darkness of the tunnel, where the blue pulse of the gate originated. "The other 60% is that the Vraxian homeworld is vaporized," Lewis said, "along with their civilian population. It is genocide disguised as a tactical maneuver." Silence settled over the group, heavy and suffocating. "We have to stop him," Tarek said, hefting his plasma cutter. "We go back up. We find him." "We can't," Lewis said. "He is already moving to the primary control interface. The command node we destroyed was just a relay. The real controls are inside the gate structure itself." Lewis stood up. The oversized armor he wore felt heavier than ever, not just with physical weight, but with the burden of what he was about to do. He was a logistics officer. His oath was to the Alliance, to the chain of command, to the efficiency of the system. But the system was broken. The system was a meat grinder fed by lies. "If we go down there," Lewis said, his voice steadying, "we are committing treason. High treason. If we survive, we will be court-martialed. We will never go home." Maya stood up and wiped her hands on her trousers. "Lewis, I am a doctor. I swore an oath to save lives. Kyle is planning to kill billions. My choice was made a long time ago." "And I," Tarek added, "have always wanted to dismantle a piece of Tier 1 Alliance infrastructure. It is on my bucket list." Lewis looked at Irene. The Volpari woman was still staring into the dark. Her ears were flattened against her skull, and her tail was twitching with a nervous, erratic rhythm. "Irene," Lewis asked. She turned to him. Her amber eyes were wide, the pupils dilated. "The gate is loud down here, Lewis. It is screaming." "Then we go quiet it down," Lewis said. "We are going to the core." The journey toward the roots of the Ember Gate was a descent into the throat of a god. They followed the service tunnels that Lewis had identified on the stolen schematics. He led them with the intuition of a man who had spent his life studying the laziness of government contractors. "Why are we taking the ventilation shaft?" Tarek grumbled, as they crawled through a cramped metallic tube. "The main maintenance lift is operational." "Because the maintenance lift has biometric scanners and automated turrets," Lewis explained, his voice echoing in the duct. "But the ventilation shafts were built by a subcontractor who wanted to save money on sensors. They only put alarms on the intake vents, not the exhaust. We are climbing up the chimney." They emerged into a vast cylindrical chamber that defied gravity. This was the cooling ring of the Ember Gate. Massive, superconducting coils floated in the air, suspended by magnetic fields. The air here was freezing, causing their breath to mist. There was no floor, only a dizzying drop into a blue abyss below, and a tangled web of pipes and catwalks stretching upward. "Zero gravity zone ahead," Lewis warned. "Mag boots on." They engaged the magnetic locks on their boots and began to walk up the vertical walls. It was disorienting. Up became down, and the vast machinery of the gate loomed around them like the internal organs of a mechanical beast. As they climbed, Irene moved closer to Lewis. She didn't use her mag boots. Her claws dug into the metal grating with terrifying strength, allowing her to move with a fluid, predatory grace. "Lewis," she said, her voice low over the comms channel. "We need to talk, before we reach the core." Lewis stopped, anchoring himself to a strut. "What is it?" Irene hesitated. She looked at the blue light pulsing from the center of the shaft. "You heard the voice earlier, in the tunnel." "I thought I imagined it," Lewis said. "Stress, fatigue." "You did not imagine it," Irene said. "The gate is not just a machine, Lewis. It is not just hardware. It is a consciousness, an old one, and it is waking up because Kale is hurting it." She reached out and gripped his arm. Her grip was tight, almost painful. "When we get in there," she whispered, "it might speak to you again. It might offer you things, solutions, power. Do not answer it. Do not let it in. Not yet." "Why me?" Lewis asked, searching her face. "I am just a clerk. I am a glitch." "Because you are the glitch it was waiting for," Irene said enigmatically. "Just promise me. You trust me, right?" Lewis looked at the fox mask hanging at her belt, then at her fierce, worried eyes. He remembered the warmth of her tail around his wrist the night before. "I trust you," Lewis said. "More than I trust the Alliance." "Good," she said, releasing him. "Then let's go break Kale's toy." The core of the Ember Gate was not a room. It was a cathedral of light. They breached the final airlock and floated into a spherical chamber at the very heart of the ring. The walls were lined with millions of crystalline fibers that pulsed with data, looking like a nervous system stripped bare. In the center of the sphere, suspended in a cradle of hard light energy, was the interface. It looked organic, a shifting amorphous shape of liquid metal and light that rippled like water. And standing on a platform in front of it, bathed in the blue glow, was the holographic projection of Director Kale. The real Kale was safely ensconced on a stealth frigate in orbit, but his presence here was absolute. The hologram was crisp, towering 3 meters tall, projecting his image with godlike authority. "You are persistent," Kale's voice boomed, echoing from every surface of the sphere. "I will give you that, Carter. Most variables would have been eliminated by the drone swarm." Lewis drifted forward, using his suit's thrusters to stabilize himself. Tarek, Maya, and Irene fanned out, taking cover behind the floating databanks. "Stop the sequence, Kale," Lewis shouted. "We know what you are doing. We know about the spatial collapse risk." "Risk is a component of progress," Kale replied calmly. He made a gesture, and the liquid interface behind him spiked, turning a violent violet color. "The Vraxian fleet is massing for a final push. If I do not open the gate now, we lose Ashfall 9. If we lose this system, the war drags on for another 50 years. 50 years of death, Carter. I am ending it today." "You are gambling with the universe," Lewis yelled. "You are not a strategist. You are a gambler with a god complex. And you are a hypocrite," Kale's hologram sneered, shrinking down to human size to look Lewis in the eye. "You used the logistics system to save your friends at the Ridge. You manipulated the data to get what you wanted. How is this different? I am just manipulating the data of reality." "The difference," Lewis said, his voice cold and hard, "is that I did it to save people. You are doing it to erase them." Lewis raised his rifle. "Shut it down," Kyle laughed. "Or what you will shoot a hologram. The physical controls are locked. The sequence is automated. And look," Kale pointed a translucent finger at the interface. The gate is already accepting the command. It wants to open. A deep, resonant thrum filled the chamber. It vibrated in Lewis's teeth. It wasn't a sound. It was a presence. Human, found. Lewis gasped, clutching his helmet. The voice was louder this time. It wasn't in his ears. It was in his memories. The glitch, the open door. "Lewis," Irene screamed. She launched herself from her cover, soaring through the zero gravity. She didn't attack Kyle. She flew straight for the interface. "No," Kale shouted. Security intercept, panels in the walls slid open. Combat drones' sleek silver spheres armed with laser cutters poured into the chamber. "Contact front," Tarek yelled. He grabbed a floating repair bot, ripped its logic core out, and hurled the metal carcass at the nearest drone. The collision sent both spinning into the wall. Maya was already moving her medical shield generator flared to life, creating a bubble of cover for Lewis. "Lewis, focus on the interface. We will hold them off." The chamber erupted into chaos. Laser fire crisscrossed the zero-G space, melting the crystalline fibers on the walls. Lewis ignored the battle. He focused on Irene. She landed on the platform in front of the liquid interface. She didn't hack it. She didn't shoot it. She took off her glove and placed her bare hand directly into the shifting light. The reaction was instantaneous. The violent violet color of the interface vanished, replaced by a blinding warm orange. A shockwave of energy blasted outward, knocking the drones and Kale's hologram backward. The energy didn't dissipate. It swirled around Irene, taking a shape. It formed a massive spectral fox 10 meters high, made of pure starlight. Its 9 tails lashed out, phasing through the metal walls of the chamber. Kale's hologram flickered, destabilizing. What is this? Access denied. Override. "You cannot override blood," Irene's voice echoed, amplified by the gate itself. She turned to look at Lewis. Her eyes were glowing with the same power as the gate. "Lewis, I cannot hold it. It is too strong. It needs a directive. It needs a logic structure." "What do I do?" Lewis screamed, ducking as a laser sliced the air inches from his helmet. "It is raw power," Irene shouted, her body trembling as the energy poured through her. "It is infinite potential, but it is chaos. It needs a logistics officer. It needs you to sort it." Lewis realized then what she meant. The gate wasn't just a wormhole. It was a supply chain of infinite possibilities. It was a warehouse where every door led to a different where and when. Kale was trying to smash all the doors open at once. Irene was holding the doors, but she didn't know which one to open. She needed an organizer. "Cover me!" Lewis yelled to Maya. "I am trying!" Maya shouted, her shield buckling under the fire of 3 drones. Lewis triggered his thrusters. He flew across the gap, dodging debris and laser fire. He slammed onto the platform beside Irene. The energy radiating from her was intense. It felt like standing next to a sun. "Take my hand," Irene commanded. Lewis reached out. He grabbed her hand, the one buried in the light. The world vanished. Lewis was no longer in the chamber. He was no longer in his body. He was in a white void. Floating in front of him were billions of windows. Some showed the Vraxian fleet. Some showed the Ember Ridge. Some showed worlds he had never seen, places of ice, places of fire, places of pure geometry. He felt the gate's consciousness. It was vast, ancient, and confused. It was a child given a loaded gun. "Query destination," the voice boomed. "Query protocol, Omega." Lewis felt Kyle's command pulsing in the system like a virus. "Execute maximum aperture. Target Vraxian homeworld." "No," Lewis thought. "Cancel request. Unable to cancel. Command authorization. Director level." Lewis looked at the infinite windows. He looked at the chaos. And he smiled. He was a logistics officer. He didn't fight authority. He buried it in paperwork. He rerouted it. "I am not canceling the request," Lewis thought, projecting his will into the system. "I am reclassifying the shipment." He imagined the interface as his old terminal at Helios Hub. He visualized Kale's command not as a war crime, but as a mislabeled crate. "Change destination," Lewis ordered. "Target invalid. Reroute to storage." Query. Storage definition, nowhere. Lewis thought hard. Send the energy to nowhere. Vent it into the space between spaces. List it as lost in transit. Calculating. He felt Irene's presence beside him in the void. She was the anchor. She was the one holding the connection open so he could type on the keyboard of the universe. "You are crazy," her voice whispered in his mind. "You are trying to file a wormhole under lost property." "It is the only way," Lewis replied. "We don't destroy the energy. We just misplace it." "Do it!" she screamed. Lewis pushed the mental button. Shipment rerouted. Protocol Omega indefinitely delayed. Reason logistical error. The white void shattered. Lewis slammed back into his body. He was lying on the platform. The interface had turned a calm, dormant blue. The spectral fox was gone. The drones dropped from the air, their power connections severed by the massive energy reset. Kale's hologram was flickering wildly, distorting into static. "What did you do?" Kale's voice was a garbled screech. "My readings, the energy is gone." "Where did you send it?" Lewis stood up. He was shaking. His nose was bleeding inside his helmet. But he was alive. "I filed it," Lewis panted. "Under pending investigation. It usually takes the bureaucracy about 500 years to resolve those tickets. You should hear back by the next millennium." "You idiot!" Kale screamed. "You ruined everything." "I saved everything," Lewis said. "Tarek, is the link to Kale's ship traceable?" Tarek popped up from behind a databank, waving his remaining arm triumphantly. "I traced the signal while you were playing God. I have his coordinates. I am broadcasting them to the Vraxian fleet on an open channel. I think they will be very interested to know who was trying to blow up their planet." Kale's face went pale, even in the hologram. You wouldn't." "Oops," Tarek clicked. "Button pressed. My bad." Kale's image vanished, as he presumably scrambled to flee before the Vraxian vengeance arrived. The chamber fell silent. "We did it," Maya whispered, lowering her shield. It stopped. Lewis looked down. Irene was lying on the platform. She wasn't moving. "Irene," Lewis dropped to his knees. He tore off his helmet, not caring about the air quality. He ripped off her fox mask. Her face was pale, almost translucent. Her breathing was shallow. Blood, bright orange Volpari blood, was trickling from her nose and ears. The effort of channeling the gate had nearly killed her. "Irene, wake up," Lewis pleaded, shaking her gently. "That is an order. Wake up." Her eyelids fluttered. She looked up at him, her amber eyes dim. "Did we win?" she whispered. "We won," Lewis said, tears streaking the grime on his face. "We confused the universe into submission." A weak smile touched her lips. "Good. I hate paperwork." She closed her eyes and went limp. "No, no, no," Lewis panicked. "Maya, get up here." Maya rushed over, scanning Irene with her medical tricorder. "Her neural pathways are overloaded. She is in a synaptic coma. Her body is shutting down to protect her mind." "Can you save her?" "I can stabilize her," Maya said, injecting a stimulant into Irene's neck. "But she needs real rest. She needs to be off this station." Lewis scooped Irene up in his arms. In the zero gravity, she was light as a feather, but her presence felt massive. As he held her, her tail limp and unconscious, slowly curled upward. It wound itself around Lewis's left arm, tightening in a reflex grip. Lewis looked at the tail. He remembered her story. A promise. A bond. "I have got you," Lewis whispered into her hair. "I am not letting go." He turned to Tarek and Maya. "We are leaving," Lewis said. "Tarek, can you rig the gate's local defenses to lock everyone else out? I don't want the Alliance or the Vraxian getting back in here." "I can put a password on the door," Tarek said, grinning. "Something really annoying. like password 1234. Do it, Lewis looked up at the silent blue interface one last time. Human rest now. The voice whispered, fading into the background noise of the universe. Lewis carried his fox bride toward the airlock. He was tired. He was battered. He was a traitor to the Alliance and a hero to the galaxy. But mostly, he was just a man who wanted to get his friends home. Let's go, Lewis Carter said. I think my shift is finally over. The great hall of the Helios hub had been scrubbed clean of the smell of war. Gone were the chaotic shouting of deployment orders and the frantic flashing of casualty reports. In their place hung heavy banners of blue and gold, the colors of the Galactic Alliance. 1,000 dignitaries, generals, and diplomats filled the tiered seating, their medals clinking like wind chimes in a storm. Lewis Carter stood in the waiting wing, adjusting his collar. It was stiff, scratching against his neck. He missed his oversized, battered armor. At least the armor had pockets. This ceremonial uniform was all sleek lines and synthetic silk, designed to make him look like a hero, not a soldier. You are fidgeting, a voice said from the shadows. Stop it! You look like a nervous squirrel. Lewis turned. Irene stepped into the light, and for a moment, his breath caught in his throat. She was not wearing her combat suit. She was not wearing the black undersuit stained with grease and Vraxian blood. She was wearing a gown of deep midnight blue that shimmered like the event horizon of a black hole. It was cut in the traditional Volpari style, high-collared but open at the back to accommodate her tail. And her tail, usually a dusty russet thing, was groomed to perfection, the fur gleaming with a small ribbon of silver woven near the tip. Her large fox ears were adorned with delicate silver cuffs, etched with ancient runes. Irene, Lewis breathed. You look highly optimized. I look like a diplomatic offering, she corrected, though a small smile played on her lips. She walked over to him, her movements silent on the polished floor. This is traditional court attire for a Volpari of my caste. My clan insisted. They said if I am going to stand next to the savior of HFY 9, I should not look like I just crawled out of a ventilation shaft. I like the ventilation shaft look, Lewis admitted. It felt honest. Irene reached out and straightened his medal, the Star of Valor, which hung heavy on his chest. Her fingers lingered for a second too long. Honesty is a luxury today, Lewis, she said softly. Today is about politics. It is about spin. I know, Lewis sighed, looking out at the crowd through the gaps in the curtain. They are calling it a strategic victory. They are saying the system worked, that my deployment was a fortuitous anomaly that proves the adaptability of the Alliance. They are lying, Irene said. They are lying, Lewis agreed. And in 5 minutes I have to go out there and thank them for it. He turned away from the curtain and walked to the balcony door. The hub's observation deck overlooked the planet below. HFY 9 was no longer burning. The fires had died down, replaced by the blinking lights of reconstruction drones. And high above the planet, silent and blue, the Ember Gate rotated slowly against the backdrop of stars. Lewis leaned against the railing. You know, when I pressed that button, I thought my life was over. I thought I was just a clerical error, a rounding mistake. Irene joined him at the railing. She didn't look at the planet. She looked at him. Her amber eyes were unreadable pools of ancient light. Lewis, she started, her voice unusually hesitant. If you found out that the error wasn't entirely random, would you be angry? Lewis looked at her, confused. What do you mean? It was a wobbly wheel on my chair. My finger slipped. Your finger slipped, Irene repeated slowly. But why did the system accept the command? The War Act Protocol 77B usually requires 3 levels of biometric confirmation for a civilian deployment. You bypassed all of them with 1 keystroke. Lewis frowned. I assumed the system was glitching. Holloway said the thermal sensors were misreading the drop zones. The thermal sensors were fine, Irene said. She took a deep breath, her ears flattening slightly against her skull. "I hacked them." The silence on the balcony was heavier than the vacuum of space outside. "You what?" Lewis whispered. "I sent a packet of optimization data to the Helios hub 3 days before the incident," Irene confessed. She spoke quickly now, the words tumbling out like water from a broken dam. It looked like a standard logistics update, but inside there was a macro. It lowered the verification threshold for specific user profiles. Profiles that showed high aptitude for pattern recognition, low ego, and high moral latency. Lewis stared at her. He felt the blood draining from his face. "Did you profile me?" "I profiled thousands," Irene said, her gaze dropping to her hands. "I am a seeker, Lewis. My clan, we have a pact with the Gate. The Ember Gate is not just a machine. You know that now. It is a consciousness. It has been asleep for eons, but Kale woke it up with his violence. It needed a new keykeeper, someone who wouldn't try to use it as a gun." "So you went shopping for a hero," Lewis asked, his voice rising. "And you picked me, a logistics clerk." "The Gate has had warriors," Irene said. "The Vraxian were warriors. My people were warriors. We all failed. We all tried to conquer the door instead of opening it. We needed someone who understood systems. Someone who wanted to fix things, not break them." She looked up at him, her eyes pleading. "I needed a glitch, Lewis. I set the trap. I loosened the digital screws. I just needed you to press the button. And you did." Lewis stepped back. He felt dizzy. The entire journey, the crash, the fear, the nights shivering in the ruins, the moment he thought his brother was dead, it wasn't just bad luck. It was engineered. "You manipulated me," Lewis said. "Everything. Saving me from the Vraxian, teaching me to fight. The tail was that part of the plan too, wrapping me up to keep your investment safe." Irene flinched, as if he had slapped her. "No," she said fiercely. "The selection was the mission. Saving you was the job. But the rest, the night in the ruins, the way you stood up to Kale, that was you, Lewis. And falling in love with you, that was not in the plan. That was the only variable I didn't calculate." Lewis gripped the railing. His mind was a storm of conflicting data. He wanted to be furious. He wanted to hate her. She had turned his life into a science experiment. But then, he looked at the Gate. He remembered the feeling in the core, the overwhelming chaos of infinite possibilities. He remembered how Irene had almost died, holding that door open for him. "If I had refused," Lewis asked quietly, "if I hadn't pressed the button, then the Gate would have chosen someone else eventually," Irene said. "But not in time. Kale would have forced it open. Ashfall 9 would be dust, and we never would have met." Lewis looked at her. He saw the fear in her eyes. Not fear of the war, but fear of losing him. She was a master of secrets, a fox who lived in the shadows. Yet she was standing here in the light, exposing her deepest deception, because she respected him too much to let him accept a lie. He realized then that he wasn't angry about the manipulation. He was angry that he hadn't seen it. As a logistics officer, he should have spotted the anomaly. "You hacked my life," Lewis said. "I optimized it," Irene whispered. Lewis let out a long, ragged breath. He looked at his hands that used to type memos, now hands that had reshaped the galaxy. "You are lucky I am good at fixing broken systems," Lewis said. He stepped forward and took her hand. It was trembling. "You don't get to audit me ever again," he warned her, his voice stern, but his eyes softening. "And, for the record, I am still mad. We are going to have a very long, very detailed debriefing about this later. But right now," he glanced toward the great hall, where the fanfare was beginning to play. "Right now I have to go tell a room full of generals that they are obsolete." Irene squeezed his hand. Her tail, which had been drooping, curled upward again. "You are not going to read the speech they wrote for you, are you?" Lewis grinned. It was a sharp, dangerous grin. Irene, I am a logistics officer. I never sign off on a manifest I haven't verified. The applause was deafening as Lewis walked onto the podium. The stage was massive, flanked by the flags of 50 worlds. In the front row sat the High Council, their faces serene and self-congratulatory. To the side, in a prisoner containment field, sat Director Kale. He looked diminished, stripped of his rank, staring at the floor with hateful eyes. Lewis stood at the microphone. He looked at the teleprompter. Text, citizens of the Alliance. Today we celebrate the triumph of our strategic foresight. Lewis cleared his throat. He reached out and tapped the microphone. Can everyone hear me? He asked. His voice boomed through the hall. Yes, hero, someone shouted from the back. Good, Lewis said, because I have some corrections to make to the inventory. He deleted the speech from the prompter. The screen went black. A murmur of confusion rippled through the council. My name is Lewis Carter, he began. I am a logistics officer, grade 4. My job is moving boxes. And 6 months ago I was moved. I was labeled a soldier because a button was pressed. He looked directly at the camera drones hovering overhead, broadcasting to billions of screens across the galaxy. You have been told that this was a victory of the system. You have been told that the Ember Gate was secured through the brilliant planning of the High Command. He pointed a finger at Kale. That man, Lewis, said, his voice cold, tried to turn a miracle into a bomb. He treated thousands of human lives, my brother included, as disposable assets. He called us rounding errors. He thought that if he threw enough bodies at the problem, the math would work out. The hall was dead silent. The council members were shifting uncomfortably. Security guards looked at each other, unsure if they should intervene. But here is the thing about logistics, Lewis continued, his voice rising. People aren't crates. You cannot optimize a soul. You cannot quantify courage. When you treat people like numbers, the equation fails. Always. He looked at Irene, standing in the wings. She nodded. The Vraxian are not monsters. They were desperate. The Volpari are not mercenaries. They were guardians. And we humans are not just clerks and cannon fodder. Lewis tapped his chest right over his heart. We are the variable you cannot predict. We are the ones who look at a 0% survival rate and say, I will take those odds. We are the ones who find a way when the manual says there is none. He took a deep breath. I am accepting this medal, Lewis said, touching the Star of Valor. But not for the Alliance. I am accepting it for the glitched, for the misplaced, for every soldier sent to the wrong front. And I am using the authority of this medal to make a new entry in the log. Lewis pulled a data drive from his pocket. This drive contains the full, unedited logs of the Embergate incident. It contains proof of Director Kale's genocide protocols. It contains the list of every accidental deployment that was actually a stress test. He plugged the drive into the podium's terminal. I am uploading it to the public net, now. The screens behind him flared to life, scrolling through thousands of documents. The hall erupted. Generals shouted. Kale screamed in his cell. And one last thing, Lewis said, cutting through the noise. He turned to the Ember Gate, visible through the massive viewport behind the stage. The gate is under new management. It has locked its control interface. It will no longer respond to military codes. It will no longer open for conquerors. The gate pulsed a deep, agreeing blue light, visible even from the station. From now on, Lewis declared, the gate opens only by consensus. A council of keepers, one human, one Volpari, one Vraxian, one Draven. If we don't agree, the door stays shut. He looked back at the stunned audience. The war is over, not because you won, but because we changed the rules. The aftermath was predictably a logistical nightmare, but it was the kind of nightmare Lewis loved. The Alliance government didn't collapse, but it shook. Kale was sentenced to life imprisonment on a mining colony. The High Council was forced to resign, replaced by a provisional committee that included, much to everyone's shock, a Vraxian diplomat. And on the observation deck, as the chaos of the reception wound down, a smaller, more private ceremony was taking place. It was just Louis, Irene Tarek, and Dr. Maya Vance. "You really lit the place on fire, didn't you?" Maya said, handing Louis a glass of champagne. "I think I saw a general crying." "It was efficient," Louis shrugged. "I cleared the backlog of lies." Tarek clicked his mandibles. "The Vraxian delegation is confused. They do not understand why the small soft one is in charge of the gate. But they are happy the big angry one, Kale, is gone." Irene stepped forward. The lights of the station reflected on her blue gown. She looked regal, terrifying, and beautiful. "There is one more piece of protocol," she said. "A Volpari tradition." She reached out and took Louis's left hand. She unbuttoned the cuff of his dress uniform and rolled it up. "In the old days," Irene said, her voice trembling slightly, "when a Volpari warrior found a partner worthy of the pack, someone who could run with them through the dark, they would bind them." She turned around, her tail thick and soft lifted. She wrapped it around Louis's wrist just as she had done in the ruins, but this time it was deliberate, ceremonial. "This is not just for warmth," Irene said, looking him in the eye. "This is a tether. It means that where I go, you go. It means that if you fall, I catch you. It means you are my keykeeper, and I am your gate." She pulled a small silver pin from her sash, a stylized fox curling around a key. She pinned it onto the ribbon of his Star of Valor. "Louis Carter," she said formally, "do you accept the burden of the pack? Do you accept the debt of the fox?" Louis looked at the tail wrapped around his arm. He looked at the woman who had hacked a war to find him. "I accept," Louis said, "but on one condition." Irene tilted her head. "A condition you were negotiating during a mating ritual." "Always negotiating," Louis smiled. "My condition is that I get to pick the furniture for the gate control room. If I am going to spend eternity guarding a wormhole, I want a chair with decent lumbar support." Irene laughed. It was a bright, joyous sound that chased away the last shadows of the war. "Deal," she said. She leaned in and kissed him. It wasn't a tentative kiss. It was fierce, possessive, and electric. The crowd at the reception turned to look. A hush fell over the room as the human hero and the Volpari warrior embraced, bound by a tail and a promise. "Fox Bride," someone whispered in the crowd. "Fox Bride," another echoed. Epilogue, 6 months later. The control room of the Ember Gate was, by all accounts, the most organized place in the universe. Louis sat in his chair, an ergonomic masterpiece of black leather and memory foam, watching the traffic flow. Ships from a dozen species lined up in orderly queues, waiting for their turn to pass through the shimmering ring. "Freighter 7 Alpha, you are cleared for transit to the Vega sector," Louis said into his headset. "Please mind the gravitational shear on exit. And have a nice day." "Thank you, Keykeeper," the pilot replied. Louis leaned back. He took a sip of real coffee, a perk of the job. Next to him, sitting on a console that hummed with ancient power, was Irene. She was wearing a modified version of her combat suit, lighter and more comfortable. She was cleaning a vibro knife, looking bored. "It is too quiet," she complained. "No explosions, no running, just scheduling." "It is peace, Irene," Louis said. "Peace is supposed to be boring. Boring is good. Boring means people are alive to complain about the wait times." "I suppose," she sighed. She hopped off the console and walked over to him. She draped her arms around his neck, her tail lazily curling around the back of his chair. "But admit it. You miss the adrenaline. You miss the chaos." Louis looked at the screen. He saw the efficiency rating of the gate holding steady at 99.8%. He saw a Vraxian transport docking peacefully with a human medical ship. "No," Louis said softly. "I don't miss the chaos. I spent my whole life trying to fix chaos. This is what I pressed the button for." "Speaking of buttons," Irene said, a mischievous glint in her eyes. Tarek sent a message. He says he found another gate. In the Andromeda sector. It is dormant, but it is pinging. Lewis froze. Another gate. Apparently, Irene grinned. And the council wants us to go check it out. They say it is a diplomatic survey mission. Lewis looked at her. Does diplomatic survey mean entering a hostile unknown zone with high probability of death? Probably, Irene said. Interested. Lewis looked at his perfect spreadsheets. He looked at his ergonomic chair. Then, he looked at his fox bride, whose eyes were shining with the promise of a new adventure. He sighed, standing up and grabbing his jacket. I am going to need a bigger travel requisition form, Lewis said. Irene laughed and took his hand. Outside, the Ember Gate turned slowly in the void, a silent guardian over a galaxy that was finally perfectly beautifully organized. And in the center of it all, the logistics officer and the fox walked toward the next open door, ready to see what was on the other side.